Karen broke into my root cellar. So I locked the door and let the sheriff handle her. Before we dive into the story, drop a comment below and tell us where you're watching from. Enjoy the story. I saw blood on my hands. That was my first thought, and for one terrifying second, I froze. I'd just stepped out into the crisp Wisconsin morning, expecting to gather a few root vegetables from the East Garden, and instead found myself kneeling in crimson-soaked dirt, my gloves dripping red, my harvest crushed, my breath caught. "Oh my God," I whispered, heart pounding. Then the smell hit me, earthy, sweet, vaguely metallic, and I exhaled in a mix of horror and realization. Beet juice. And standing 10 feet away, clutching a half-empty container of weed killer in one hand and a smug little smirk on her face, was Paula Whitmore, self-declared HOA president, spiritual descendant of Marie Antoinette, and, as I would come to understand, living proof that power in the wrong hands doesn't need a title to destroy lives. "You really should fence this better, Elliot," she said, gesturing toward my trampled garden with the condescension of someone giving advice about throw pillows. Would hate for any misfortunes to happen. My jaw clenched. "This is private property," I said, voice low. "You're trespassing." She rolled her eyes. "Oh, please. The HOA map says the line is right here." She stabbed the air with a perfectly manicured finger, pointing to a spot 2 feet into my raised bed. "And your little dirt farm is a health hazard. My husband's landscaper says your compost pile is attracting voles." "Funny," I said, standing slowly. "My trail camera says it was your dog digging through my compost 2 nights ago. And your husband told me last week he hates voles." There was a pause, a flicker of something meaner in her eyes. Then, she laughed, a short, humorless sound. "You know, Elliot, some people move to the country to find peace. Others just bring their chaos with them." And with that, she turned on her spotless hiking boots that had never touched real terrain in their life, and walked off, leaving a trail of beet pulp, herbicide fumes, and menace. I stood there another full minute, the October wind brushing against my face, trying to decide whether to laugh, scream, or throw my remaining carrots at her Tesla. I moved here for peace. After 35 years in aerospace engineering, including the kind of work that makes your hands shake and your dreams twitch, I wanted dirt under my nails, not deadlines. So when my Uncle Ray passed and left me his modest 10-acre farm tucked outside Maple Hollow, I didn't think twice. Sold the Denver condo, packed the tools, and drove east with nothing but a thermos of black coffee and Neil Diamond on the radio. At first, it was paradise. Chickens in the yard. Sunrise over the soybean fields. A root cellar stocked with preserves from Ray's old canning recipes. No traffic. No deadlines. Just the sweet, slow ache of earned labor and the smell of wet soil. Then came Paula. She moved in 6 weeks after me, into the neighborhood's one modern estate, a glass monstrosity built by some retiree surgeon who apparently thought rural meant Aspen chic. Paula bought it, remodeled it, installed an infinity pool in a county that freezes 9 months a year, and declared herself the president of the HOA, which, at the time, consisted of 5 part-time board members and a 12-page document printed in Comic Sans. Her first order of business? Noise complaints. About what? My chickens. Not roosters, I don't keep those. Just hens. Gentle clucking. Real soft-spoken birds. "You call that natural?" she'd sneer, staring down at them like they were hooligans loitering outside a Louis Vuitton store. "This isn't a barnyard." She sent letters. Called the county inspector. Reported me for unregulated livestock, even though zoning explicitly allowed them. Next came the compost pile. Then the solar panels. Then the tomatoes. Apparently, they were exceeding allowable vertical vegetation height. I kid you not. Every time she failed through official means, she escalated unofficially. Lights flashing into my windows at night. HOA wellness checks that felt more like interrogations. And now? Now she'd doused my vegetables in herbicide. I called the sheriff. Not 911. I'm not dramatic. Just the station. Got Deputy Lyle, who knew me from the town market and had once bought a whole flat of my cucumbers. "Let me guess," he said after I explained. Paula again. Caught her red-handed. Well, beat-handed. With poison. "Elliot, I'd love to help, but unless you've got video or she confesses, it's just your word against hers." I looked down at the crushed beets, the smeared gloves, the slowly wilting green tops. "I'll get you video," I muttered. That night, I didn't sleep. I installed 2 new trail cameras, moved one of my thermal sensors from the coop to the root cellar, and placed a motion-activated floodlight directly over the east garden. At 3:12 a.m., it flashed. She was back, wearing black yoga pants, a Patagonia hoodie, and I swear this is true, night vision goggles. The footage shows her crawling along the hedgerow like she was on a recon mission. She paused at the edge of the compost bin, peered inside, then circled around to the root vegetables again. This time, she brought something else, a container of blue powder, likely a fertilizer contaminant or maybe lime. She didn't notice the red dot flashing above her. She didn't know I was watching from my living room, sipping day-old coffee and murmuring gotcha. The next morning, she filed a complaint. Said I'd threatened her personal space with an illegal laser system. Called the HOA. Demanded an emergency board meeting. Suggested that my chickens were weaponized with avian flu. I printed the photo of her in the goggles. Dropped it in the HOA mailbox. No note. Just the timestamp. Here's the thing. HOAs were created to protect neighborhoods from blight, from decay, from property disputes. But what happens when they become the blight? When one person with too much time, too little empathy, and an overstocked wine fridge decides they know better than the community? What happens when caring about property values turns into controlling lives? It starts with letters. Then it becomes fines. Then surveillance. Then we'd kill her. So yeah, the beats were red. But so were her hands. And this time, I wasn't letting it slide. At 3:07 a.m., my security system pinged with a notification. Motion detected, chicken coop cam 3. I tapped the live feed on my phone. What I saw nearly made me drop the thing into my oatmeal. A fox, not a blurry shape, not a shadow. A very real, very sleek red fox with its snout pressed against the latch of my chicken coop, tail twitching, eyes gleaming. Behind it, a human figure crouched in the bushes. Black hoodie, yoga pants, pearl necklace. It was Paula Whitmore. And she was smiling. It would have been almost poetic if it weren't so deranged. Here I was, a 62-year-old man trying to grow tomatoes and teach myself how to pickle turnips, and my neighbor was staging a tactical fox drop, like she was running covert ops for a Cold War version of the PDA. The fox made its move, but my reinforced coop, built with hardware cloth and common sense, held firm. The hens squawked, flapped, and puffed up like feathered grenades, but not a single one was harmed. I watched Paula step out of the bushes, brush off her knees, and pull a small dish. Yes, a porcelain dish, out of a cloth bag. She set it on the ground, tapped it twice, and the fox trotted over to eat from it like some kind of HOA-trained assassin. I'd had enough. At dawn, I printed stills from the footage. High resolution, clear as daylight. Paula's face illuminated by my infrared camera, smiling like she'd just won Best Landscape Design instead of just committed an act of rural terrorism. I drove straight to the sheriff's office. Deputy Lal blinked when he saw the images. Is that Miss Whitmore? Unless she's got a twin who also wears pearl chokers to commit poultry-related crimes. Yes. He scratched his head. I mean, it's weird. But technically, releasing a wild animal isn't illegal unless you trapped or transported it. So if I brought a raccoon to your house, dumped it on your porch, and said, "Happy Monday," you'd just shrug? He had the grace to look sheepish. Well, talk to her. Which, as any rural homeowner knows, is law enforcement code for we'll ask her nicely and then go get coffee. The next week, my mailbox was stuffed with pamphlets. They weren't addressed. Just anonymous, brightly printed flyers dropped throughout the neighborhood. Is your neighbor prepping for doomsday? A photo of my root cellar, taken without permission, was placed below a clip-art mushroom cloud. Hazardous storage. Private chickens. Dangerous chemicals. One subheading read, "If he's not hiding something, why all the cameras?" It was signed, "Concerned Citizens for a Safe Maple Hollow," aka Paula with a new Canva account and too much Pinot Grigio. At the monthly HOA meeting, held inside the sunroom of some poor soul who hadn't figured out how to say no, Paula went full Hollywood. She arrived wearing an American flag scarf, reading glasses she didn't need, and an air of matronly concern. "We're not trying to attack anyone," she said sweetly, "but I've spoken to multiple families who are frightened, truly frightened, by the strange smells and industrial-level composting happening next to their children's play areas." I raised my hand. "There are no children on this street." She ignored me. and the presence of multiple security cameras aimed outward from a private residence indicates a potential lack of trust in the community fabric. Is this how we want to live? Under surveillance. I stood. The only thing I'm surveilling is you sneaking around at night like a sociopathic Martha Stewart. Gasps. Murmurs. One older gentleman snorted into his lemonade. The real kicker came when she filed a formal HOA violation. Unapproved root cellar structure. Mind you, this cellar had been built in 1952, long before the HOA even existed, let alone before Paula graced Wisconsin with her designer landscaping and laminated bylaws. But she insisted it violated aesthetic harmony standards. In response, I laminated a photo of her releasing a fox and stapled it to the HOA bulletin board. Underneath it, I wrote, "Is this part of aesthetic harmony too?" That night, she retaliated by leaving an anonymous letter taped to my door. It read, "Some people bring rot with them. Maybe you should have stayed in Denver with the rest of the urban decay. This isn't your land, Elliot. It's ours." That line, "It's ours," stayed with me. Because it was never about chickens or compost or root vegetables. It was about control. About someone trying to turn a neighborhood into a fiefdom. About hiding behind the word community to disguise raw, unfiltered entitlement. And if I didn't push back now, it would never stop. So I pushed back. I sent the fox video to the Wisconsin Wildlife Department. Turns out, releasing animals in a residential area is a violation of both nuisance wildlife laws and HOA codes. I requested the meeting minutes from the last 12 HOA gatherings. Turns out Paula had filed 5 false reports under her own name and 3 under the alias P.W. Concerned, I installed a sign at the edge of my driveway. "Smile, Paula, you're on candid camera. And I have legal backup this time." And then came the strangest twist of all. Mrs. Boylan, a sweet 80-year-old widow who once baked me cornbread, showed up with a pie and a confession. "I think she's been using my name on letters," she whispered, eyes wide behind her glasses. "I got a fine notice last week for something I never said. I just wanted to tell you, Elliot, you're not alone." She handed me the pie and walked away, dignity intact. That moment, that was the turning point. Because when quiet people start standing up, even with pies, tyrants start to tremble. 2 days later, I caught Paula snooping around my compost again. She saw the new camera, saw the blinking red light, and froze. I stepped outside with a flashlight and a calm voice. "Evening, Paula. Looking for more voles." She turned slowly, mask slipping. "You think you're clever, don't you?" "No, but I'm consistent." She glared, then walked off without another word. Later that week, I found another HOA notice on my porch. It was different this time. Typed in a plain font. No logo. No signature. It said, "You're upsetting the balance. Back off, or we'll escalate." I smiled, poured myself some lemonade, and went to check the cameras. Because you don't scare a man who's lived through management meetings at Lockheed Martin. You just remind him why he retired to the dirt in the first place. There's something uniquely unsettling about the sound of a padlock turning in the dead of night. It wasn't the clink that startled me. It was the fact that it was my padlock, on my cellar door, and the hand twisting it, slender, gloved, and shockingly unbothered, belonged to none other than Paula Whitmore. And this time, she wasn't releasing foxes. She brought chemicals. It was October 27th, the first night that hinted at winter. A stiff wind was pushing against the east wall of my house, and I had just settled into my armchair with a cup of chamomile and a dog-eared John Grisham novel when my phone vibrated with a level 2 perimeter alert. Motion, southeast quadrant. Root cellar exterior, entry breach attempt. I tapped into the live feed, expecting a raccoon. Or maybe Paula's landscaper again trying to accidentally drive a lawn tractor over my raised beds. What I saw was Paula herself. Black windbreaker, work boots, nitrile gloves, and in her left hand, a gallon-sized jug of commercial-grade weed killer, the kind with enough warnings on the label to make a nuclear physicist nervous. She moved with practiced precision, removing the decoy padlock I'd left hanging as bait, revealing the hidden keypad behind it. She typed something, failed twice, then pulled out a hairpin and started fiddling with the manual override. My blood went cold. That root cellar wasn't just storage. It was the soul of the land. My late Uncle Ray had spent decades turning it into a climate-controlled marvel of rural engineering. Shelves lined with canned peaches, heirloom tomatoes, pickled okra, and jars of homemade jam. Potatoes stored by variety. Beets bundled like museum pieces. It wasn't just food, it was legacy. And Paula? Paula was about to kill it. She got the hatch open, stepped down, glancing around like she was casing a bank. The camera inside caught everything. Her gloves, her bag, the glint of the label on the jug. I didn't hesitate. I opened the app, clicked Engage Lockdown, heard the electronic deadbolt slide into place. 3 seconds later, the panic began. The video feed showed her reaction in stunning clarity. The door slammed. A metallic clunk echoed. She spun around, stumbled up the steps, and yanked on the handle. Nothing. Paula Whitmore, former luxury realtor, current HOA queen, part-time suburban tyrant, was locked in a root cellar. And I had never felt so calm in my life. She began pounding, then screaming, "You can't do this. This is unlawful detention. I'll own this place." She rattled the door like a banshee. I sipped my tea, tapped the mic on button. "Good evening, Paula," I said. "Please refrain from further vandalism. Sheriff Harper is on his way. Oh, and that jug? Try not to spill it. The drain you're standing on leads to a sealed containment tank. Every drop you pour is being collected for analysis." The silence that followed was delicious. Then, predictably, I was checking for carbon monoxide. I blinked. In a root cellar? At midnight? With weed killer? She didn't answer. I called the sheriff. He picked up on the second ring. "Granger, got a situation." He sighed. "Paula, caught her inside the cellar. With chemicals. I locked her in." A pause. "Then, you locked her in?" "It's a secure space. Heated. Ventilated. She's got a bench and, thanks to my uncle's eccentric plumbing hobby, even a composting toilet. She's safe. Just contained. Stay put. I'll be there in 40. In the meantime, Paula made a phone call of her own. I saw her on camera, muttering angrily into her phone. 15 minutes later, headlights flared across my drive. A black BMW idled beside my coupe. Out stepped Gregory Whitmore, her husband, silver-templed, Armani-suited, and furious. I met him on the porch, phone in hand. "Where is she?" he barked. "In the root cellar." "You what?" She broke in. "Brought chemicals. I have video, timestamps, and samples draining into a sealed tank as we speak." He narrowed his eyes. "This is false imprisonment." "No," I said calmly. "This is lawful containment of an intruder on private property while awaiting law enforcement. And you, sir, are trespassing unless you're here as legal counsel." That hit him. He adjusted his collar. "You're making a mistake." I smiled. I made a lot of mistakes. Letting her spray my vegetables wasn't one of them. We waited in silence. Paula's voice drifted up faintly from the cellar, alternating between threats and declarations of being medically fragile. Gregory didn't flinch. Then she tried another trick. "I was just checking for mold." He muttered, "Oh, for God's sake." Sheriff Harper arrived at 12:41 a.m. Big man. Sturdy voice. Tired eyes. He reviewed the footage. Every angle. He watched Paula pick the lock. Step inside. Uncap the jug. Start pouring. And then he exhaled slowly. "Well," he said, "this is new." We opened the hatch. Paula stumbled out like a contestant from Survivor, Suburbia. Her pearls were askew. Hair frizzy. One glove missing. Her rage? Intact. "You're all going to jail. This is kidnapping." Sheriff Harper stepped in, hand raised. "Mrs. Whitmore," he said, "you are on camera committing breaking and entering, attempted destruction of private property, and illegal possession of restricted herbicide. You are not the victim here." Paula blinked. "No." I was concerned. "About the compost." I offered. "The community," she spat. "The community isn't in your basement," I said. Harper crossed his arms. "Ma'am, unless you'd like to add obstruction of justice to the list, I suggest you come with me." She turned to Gregory. He didn't move. In fact, he stepped back. "Don't," he said softly. "I told you this would happen." Her jaw dropped. "Gregory." "No." She looked at me, then at the sheriff, then finally at the camera still pointed at her from the porch roof. The realization hit. She was caught. Truly. Finally. That night, she was taken into custody. I submitted all the evidence. The footage, the soil samples, the jug, which had just enough left to confirm its contents, glyphosate concentrate, illegal for residential use in that quantity. The drain tank contained over a quart of it. Pure, undiluted, Traceable. Harper shook my hand before leaving. You were smart. You were prepared. That's rare. I nodded. I've dealt with engineers before, he added. But you? You think like a trapper. As I stood alone on the porch, watching the squad car's taillights disappear, I realized something. She hadn't just tried to poison my vegetables. She'd tried to poison trust. To convince people that power gives you immunity. That community means obedience, and that those who don't fit her mold should be silenced or pushed out. But the ground remembers. And this time, it was her who got buried. The Jaguar arrived like a threat. Sleek. Polished. Black as midnight sin. Its headlights sliced through the October fog. Engine humming with restrained menace, like a lawsuit on four wheels. The car didn't roll, it prowled. And when the door opened, it wasn't a deputy or a neighbor or even a halfway curious reporter stepping out. It was Charles Whitmore, Paula's husband, litigator, strategist, and, according to the Maple Hollow Rotary Club, the only man in the Tri-County area who could bankrupt a priest and still get invited to the funeral. He was wearing Italian loafers, a cashmere trench coat, and the expression of someone who once cross-examined a nun over a parking ticket. He didn't look left, didn't look right. He just walked straight up to my porch like he owned the deed. Mr. Granger, he said, tone flat. I'm here for my wife. I didn't get up. I was in my rocking chair with a blanket over my knees and a mug of reheated coffee in one hand, like some retired prairie emperor who'd just won a battle without leaving his throne. She's not available at the moment, I said. He narrowed his eyes. You've unlawfully confined her. Actually, I replied, taking a slow sip. She unlawfully entered my cellar with an unmarked gallon of restricted herbicide and was detained until law enforcement arrived. That's called citizen's arrest, Mr. Whitmore. Perfectly legal under Wisconsin Statute 968.24. His lip twitched. Your understanding of the law is quaint, and your understanding of the Fourth Amendment seems to be filtered through a bottle of weed killer. He pulled out a phone. I'm calling Judge Weller. You'll be served by morning. I leaned forward and set my mug down with a gentle clink. Before you do that, I said, maybe take a look at this. I reached into the milk crate beside me and handed him a folder, thick, neatly tabbed, and stamped in bold Sharpie. Evidence. Entry October 27th. He opened it. Page 1. A full-color still of Paula mid-pour, the jug's label partially visible. Page 2. Time-stamped thermal image of her entering the property at 11:54 p.m. Page 3. A diagram of the root cellar's drain system, including the containment tank where every drop of the chemical had gone. Then came the environmental reports. Chain of custody logs. Soil toxicity records. A notarized letter from Olivia Brenner, certified environmental chemist, confirming sample integrity. Charles flipped faster, then slower, then stopped. I have 3 more binders inside, I said. And the jug itself, still sealed with gloves bagged as evidence. He looked up. For the first time, there was something flickering in his eyes. Doubt. Not fear yet. Not quite. But that early-stage tremor lawyers get when they realize the opposition knows how to file alphabetically. You're bluffing, he said, but it was softer now. You're welcome to think so. But Sheriff Harper didn't. He closed the folder carefully, as if it might explode in his hands. From the security monitor beside me, I noticed Paula's image flicker back into frame. She was pacing inside the patrol car, still handcuffed, still ranting at the window like a Shakespearean villain who'd just discovered the second act wasn't going her way. I turned the screen so Charles could see. He watched for a moment, then looked at me. That footage. You're distributing it. Nope, not yet. But if the HOA decides to fine me for cellar renovations again, or if you try any intimidation tactics, I've been told 3 local stations would love to air it. Might even make a good public service announcement. Charles clenched his jaw. I could practically hear the calculus behind his corneas. He wasn't used to being outmaneuvered, especially not by a man with arthritis and a compost pile. Let's talk resolution, he finally said. I raised an eyebrow. Now we're civil. I can draft a non-disclosure agreement and offer reasonable compensation for the damages. Stop, I said. He blinked. This isn't a business transaction. This isn't a corporate spill or a zoning loophole. This is your wife breaking into my land with intent to destroy food meant for people. This is health. This is legacy. And frankly, Charles, this is war. He looked like he wanted to argue, But he didn't. Instead, he did something unexpected. He sat down on the wooden step just under my porch light, dusting off his trousers like a man who'd forgotten how to lower himself onto actual wood. "You don't understand," he said after a long pause. "She's been obsessed with that property line since we moved in. Keeps saying there's history here, that if anyone digs deep enough." He cut himself off. I leaned in. "Go on." She mentioned liabilities, old records, something buried. At first, I thought she meant metaphorically. I waited. He sighed. Her father owned a landscaping supply company back in the 70s. Sold it off before he died. But there were whispers. Unpermitted dump sites. Fertilizer runoff. She's always feared it would surface, literally. That hit me like a shovel to the chest. My uncle had bought this land in 1978. Had always complained the backfield grew weird. Could this be it? "Why didn't you just tell me?" I asked. "Because Paula doesn't do honesty. She does control. And when she feels it slipping, well, you've seen what happens." I stood up, walked inside, came back with the jug, set it down in front of him. "You see this?" I said. "This could have poisoned my entire harvest. Could have hurt kids, pets, people. If I hadn't had those cameras, I'd be the one under investigation right now. Your wife was this close to committing a felony and blaming it on the guy with chickens and solar panels." Charles didn't speak. He just stared at the jug like it might confess. Sheriff Harper returned from the squad car and joined us on the porch. "She's invoking her right to remain silent now," he said, with just a trace of satisfaction. Charles stood, brushed off his coat. "I'll speak to her attorney." "She'll need one," Harper said. "You too, probably." Conflict of interest. That was the first time I saw it, the break. In Charles's stance. The slouch in his shoulders. The shift in his feet. The unspoken realization that the machine he'd helped build, the money, the muscle, the manipulation, couldn't fix this. Not this time. As they drove off, I remained seated on the porch, the jug of poison at my feet, the wind rattling dry corn stalks in the distance. In the stillness, I thought of the words on Paula's last flyer. "He's dangerous. He doesn't belong." Maybe that's what she feared most. That I did belong. That truth, quiet, steady, and unforgiving, had finally taken root. And that all her manicured rules, her bylaws, her thinly veiled threats couldn't stop something as simple and stubborn as justice. It started with a smell. Faint. Chemical. Wrong. The morning after Paula's arrest, I stepped out to my garden and caught it. Not manure, not compost, not even the occasional whiff of skunk from the west pasture. No, this was industrial. Like wet plastic. Like burned rubber. Like something that didn't belong in any place where life was supposed to grow. At first, I thought maybe it was residue from the herbicide Paula tried to dump. But the scent was coming from a different direction, the back quadrant of my property, where the soil never quite held shape and the weeds grew in strange, twisted spirals. I walked to the edge of the field, past the crumbling stone fence line Uncle Ray had always said was too stubborn to move and too crooked to trust. The smell grew stronger. I knelt down and dug a small hole. 4 inches in, my trowel hit something. Plastic. A thick, black trash bag, knotted tight and bloated like a tick. I pulled it out and peeled it open. Inside, a rusted metal drum lid, snapped bolts, and beneath it, sludgy black residue that shimmered like oil but stank like chemical soup. My stomach turned. I dropped the bag and backed away, ears ringing. I knew what this was. I just didn't know how much of it there was. At the sheriff's office that afternoon, Paula broke. Maybe it was the cold of the cell, or the silence of her husband, or the look on Sheriff Harper's face when he laid the evidence in front of her. Photos, videos, chemical reports, witness affidavits. Whatever it was, she cracked. "I didn't want it to come to this," she muttered, staring at the table. "I tried to buy him out. I tried to make it go away." "What exactly were you trying to hide?" the sheriff asked, voice low and even. She hesitated. Then she said it. "My father," she whispered, "founded Whitmore Agrichem in 1969. Fertilizers, soil stabilizers, turf treatments. We were growing fast. Too fast. And this land?" Harper asked. She nodded slowly. "This was one of the off-book sites. Back then, nobody asked questions. You needed to get rid of old chemicals, damaged inventory, bad batches. You didn't file a report. You just found a quiet patch of land and buried it. That's what we did. And you knew this was one of them, he pressed. She looked up, and for once, there was no defiance in her face, only age. I oversaw the dumping myself in the early 80s. I was 26. I thought I was doing my job. Thought it was temporary. Then Dad died. The company was sold. And I told myself it was over. Harper leaned forward. And when you saw someone living on it, gardening on it. She looked away. I panicked. The soil test results came in that Friday. I met Olivia, my environmental consultant, and, at this point, the only person I trusted outside my chickens, by the root cellar. She was wearing gloves and a respirator, holding a clipboard like a doctor delivering a diagnosis. Elliot, she said gently, you need to sit down. She handed me the report. And I read, PCBs, dioxins, heavy metals, in concentrations high enough to flag federal interest. This zone, she said, pointing to a red square on the map overlay, is the highest. It matches the spot where you pulled the bag. And here? I asked, pointing to the garden. She paused. It's cleaner. Still some traces, but well below danger levels. Your uncle must have chosen that spot instinctively, probably because it grew better. I exhaled, a shallow, broken sound. He hadn't even known he was protecting us. He just followed the plants. That night, I stood in the middle of my field, flashlight in one hand, thermos in the other, and looked at the land that had carried my family's hopes for decades. How do you grieve a betrayal buried in the dirt? This place had raised me every summer, fed me, healed me, and now I learned it had been poisoned before I ever arrived, with secrets layered beneath the roots. I remembered Paula's words on the HOA pamphlets. This isn't your land. It's ours. And now I understood what she really meant. This land wasn't just hers. It was her family's legacy of wrongdoing. A buried past that had just started to sprout. And she had tried to bury me with it. The story spread like wildfire. By Monday, the Wisconsin Department of Natural Resources had launched a full investigation. By Wednesday, a team in hazmat suits was walking my property. Drones buzzed overhead. Soil samples were taken every 10 feet. The EPA called by Thursday. And on Friday, I was contacted by a class action attorney from Milwaukee asking if I knew of other properties purchased from Whitmore Agrichem during the 1980s. Sir, he said, this might not be an isolated case. You may have just uncovered the tip of something historic. Great. All I ever wanted was to grow carrots. Meanwhile, the community, once suspicious of me thanks to Paula's lies, began to turn. Mrs. Boylan left a pie on my porch with a note. You were right. We're sorry. The Lincolns next door planted wildflowers along the fence between our lots. And when I went into town for supplies, the cashier at the feed store said, heard you caught a chemical queen red-handed. Let me know if you need help building new beds. Small things. But they mattered. Because for months, I'd been made to feel like the outsider. Now the mask had fallen off the insider. Paula resigned from the HOA in a typed statement sent by her lawyer. It read like a victim impact essay written by a Disney villain in denial. I regret that my actions were misunderstood. I only ever wanted to preserve the aesthetic and environmental quality of our neighborhood. The neighborhood she once ruled, now referred to her as Hazmat Paula. The HOA board quietly scrubbed her name from their minutes. Even her supporters stopped returning calls. As for her husband, Gregory filed for separation 2 weeks later. His lawyer sent me a letter. My client disavows all knowledge of Mrs. Whitmore's activities and offers full cooperation with state and federal authorities. Translation: he knows the ship is sinking, and he's rowing away in $700 loafers. The final blow came from Olivia. She stood with me in the garden as dusk rolled in, holding a core sample tube from the contaminated zone. Elliot, she said, this land is wounded. But it can heal. How long? Years. Maybe more. But there are remediation options. Phytoremediation, soil swapping, bioreactors. We can bring it back. It won't be easy, but it'll be honest. That word hit me. Honest. Everything Paula had tried to avoid, I was going to plant in daylight. Let the world see. Let the roots grow clean. At exactly 6:42 a.m. on a Tuesday, the peace of Maple Hollow was shattered, not by a storm, not by sirens, but by the thunderous roar of a CNN satellite truck turning into my driveway and promptly crushing my mailbox. Sir, is this the Granger farm? A young man in khakis and panic asked, holding a microphone like it might bite him. I blinked, still in my bathrobe, gripping a coffee mug that read, "Retired, but still right." "You're parked on my carrots," I said. He blinked. "Sir, how does it feel to be at the center of the largest illegal toxic dumping case in Wisconsin's modern history?" I took a sip. Muddy. It had only been 6 days since Paula Whitmore's carefully curated life imploded like an overwatered souffle. Her confession had triggered a statewide EPA probe. Within 72 hours, 6 other properties once owned by Whitmore Agrichem were swarmed by hazmat teams. Each revealed more of the same: buried drums, degraded plastic, sick soil. By the end of the week, 10 homes were under federal watch. By the following Monday, the story had hit national news. The headline on Good Morning America? Root Cellar Scandal. HOA Queen Caught Covering Up Chemical Dumping Empire. It was paired with a photo of Paula mid-scream, framed by the beam of my porch light, hair frizzed, pearls askew, and a jug of glyphosate clutched like a trophy of suburban warfare. And me? I was now the chicken farmer who unearthed corporate corruption. I didn't want fame. I wanted my tomatoes back. But by day 9, my front yard looked like a war zone. Tripods, microphones on sticks, microphones shaped like squirrels. Seriously. NPR brought a weird one. A reporter from Channel 6 tried to interview my hens. Fox News accused me of orchestrating a liberal deep state land grab. The EPA called and asked if I could hold off on harvesting any root crops, just in case any of them needed to become evidence. I didn't know whether to laugh, cry, or plant more beets. Meanwhile, Paula's mugshot became an internet meme. Her HOA-issued jacket, smeared with root cellar grime, paired nicely with the bold font caption. I tried to grow control. He grew subpoenas. Even late-night shows picked it up. Jimmy Kimmel quipped. And in Wisconsin, a woman tried to poison her neighbor's vegetables, proving once again that HOA stands for harass others aggressively. But while the world laughed, I was dealing with something far less funny. I had a super fun site blooming under my backyard. The EPA declared my backfield a priority zone. Fencing went up. Testing expanded. Olivia, my environmental consultant turned part-time bodyguard, coordinated with university labs to analyze leach levels. "You're in the center of a perfect storm," she said one night. "Corporate negligence, environmental abuse, property rights violations, and HOA overreach, all in one man's cabbage patch." "Great," I muttered. "Can I trademark it?" And then came the lawyers. Oh, the lawyers. A class action firm out of Milwaukee organized a community town hall meeting in the local Lutheran Fellowship Hall, the same room where, 6 months earlier, Paula had hosted a How to File a Noise Complaint workshop complete with PowerPoint and lemon bars. This time, the PowerPoint read, "You may be entitled to compensation." They estimated damages in the tens of millions. Medical claims were being evaluated, and the cleanup alone could take years. Paula's name was listed in every document. Her signature, as Waste Operations Director for Whitmore Agrichem, appeared on shipment records, soil logs, and internal memos with phrases like "quiet burial, West Quadrant." It wasn't just negligence. It was conspiracy. One night, as I walked the edge of my field, now lit with floodlights and orange cones, I heard a voice. "Mr. Granger." I turned to see an older woman I didn't recognize. She held a newspaper in one hand, a pie in the other. "I'm Joyce Denton," she said softly. "I live downwind of a Whitmore Agrichem site in Greenfield. My husband died of lymphoma 3 years ago. They told me it was bad luck." She handed me the paper. The headline read, "New contamination site discovered. Victims speak out." I swallowed hard. "You didn't just grow vegetables," she said. "You unearthed history." The Maple Hollow Co-op invited me to speak. So did UW-Madison School of Environmental Science. A middle schooler from 2 towns over sent me a letter asking if I could help her class build a garden that doesn't have poison in it. And through it all, I tried to stay grounded. Literally. I built raised beds, clean soil trucked in under EPA supervision. I put up a new sign by the driveway. This farm stood, even when they tried to bury it. And as for the HOA, it collapsed faster than a folding chair under a moose. With Paula gone and 2 board members resigning in shame, the remaining residents voted to dissolve the association. The bylaws, including the infamous vertical vegetation clause and the approved chicken coloration standard, were burned in a bonfire at the edge of the town park. Mrs. Boylan danced. She was 84. 1 year later, I stood under a canopy in my yard, now a designated educational demonstration site, as kids planted marigolds and learned about soil health. One of them, a boy about 10, looked up at me and asked, "Mister, how did you know something was wrong?" I thought about Paula, about the smell, about the twisted weeds, the fox, the surveillance, the jug, and then I smiled. I didn't, I said, but the land did. The courtroom smelled like bleach. That was the first thing I noticed. Not justice, not fear, not the wood polish they use on TV shows. No, it was bleach, sharp, sterile, and trying far too hard to scrub away the stench of everything that had led us here, including Paula Whitmore, who now sat at the defendant's table, lips pursed like she'd just bitten into a lemon that sued her for defamation. Gone were the pearls. Gone was the HOA-issued navy blazer. Gone was the smug suburban queen who once threatened to reclaim this land for tasteful landscaping. Instead, she wore a beige suit 2 sizes too big and the kind of makeup that screamed court-ordered humility. But what caught everyone's attention was the opening statement. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," her lawyer began, a man who looked like he kept teeth in his briefcase just for gritting. "My client did not act out of malice. She acted out of concern." He gestured toward me, seated beside Olivia, who had volunteered to serve as my environmental science advisor and emotional bouncer. This man was operating a potentially hazardous food operation with unknown soil content, improper containment, and a compost system visible from the street. I blinked. That was the defense? That my carrots offended property values? Then Paula stood. To the audible groan of her own legal counsel, she raised her hand and said, "Your Honor, may I speak?" The judge, an elderly woman with the patience of a bonsai tree, sighed. "Ms. Whitmore, your counsel has advised." "I must say this," Paula interrupted, clutching the rail. "I wasn't trying to poison anyone. I was trying to protect the neighborhood from visual entropy." The room went dead silent. Visual entropy? A man in the third row stifled a cough that sounded suspiciously like laughter. Then came the evidence. And that's when everything shifted. The prosecution, led by a state attorney who looked like she'd spent her life taking down men twice her size, began her parade of witnesses. First up, Sheriff Harper. He recounted, in exquisite detail, the night of Paula's unlawful root cellar excursion. The security footage rolled. The courtroom watched as Paula jimmied the lock, stepped inside with a jug of herbicide, and attempted to pour it down a drain before getting locked in and screaming about carbon monoxide. When the video paused on her face, wild-eyed and red-handed, someone in the audience muttered, "Gotcha." Next came the EPA investigator. He explained, in painfully clear terms, how the soil contained not just glyphosate, but legacy toxins from the 1980s, dioxins, PCBs, and more. He even brought a jar of contaminated soil. Sealed, of course. When the judge asked if the jar was necessary, the investigator said, "With respect, Your Honor, the soil tells the truth." And it did. That dirt had more memory than Paula had HOA bylaws. The turning point came during cross-examination. Paula's lawyer tried to argue that no formal permits were filed proving she was aware of hazardous waste. The prosecutor flipped open a binder. "Exhibit 42, she said calmly. A memo signed by the defendant in 1983 approving quiet disposal of chemical surplus on rural parcels, including the land in question. Paula's face went flat. Charles Whitmore, seated in the gallery 3 rows back, slowly stood, picked up his coat, and walked out without a word. His wedding ring sat on the bench beside him. The room didn't need a verdict. We already had one. When the sentence was read, I wasn't prepared. I'd expected a fine. Maybe probation. What I got was vindication. Ms. Paula Whitmore, the judge said, voice crisp like a winter branch. You are hereby sentenced to 6 years in federal custody for multiple counts of environmental fraud, trespassing, attempted destruction of private agricultural property, and obstruction of a federal investigation. The courtroom held its breath. You will also pay restitution to all impacted property owners, surrender any position of power in residential associations for life, and issue a public apology to be published in 3 major Wisconsin papers and your former HOA newsletter. There it was. Justice. Neat. Measured. Legally binding. Paula didn't cry. Didn't speak. just sat down, as if the chair might offer a last shred of control. But her mugshot? That spoke volumes. It went viral within hours. Her expression, a cocktail of rage and disbelief, became an instant meme. Hashtag Cellar Justice trended across Facebook groups like wildfire. Someone photoshopped her holding a can of Raid and surrounded by chickens. The caption? She tried to bury the truth. Instead, she grew time. As for me, I didn't gloat, didn't dance. I just stood outside the courthouse with Olivia, looking up at the sky that somehow seemed cleaner. A reporter asked if I had a statement. I nodded. I came here to grow vegetables, I said. Not enemies. She scribbled. But when someone poisons the land and calls it beautification, you have two choices: get buried quietly or stand up and dig. Later that week, I received a letter from Gregory Whitmore. Typed. Simple. No signature. Mr. Granger, I failed to stop what I should have questioned years ago. Your actions restored more than soil. They restored the line between influence and integrity. Thank you for drawing it so clearly. Enclosed was a check for $25,000 labeled Unofficial Repair Fund. I used it to build a community greenhouse. It's called the root of it all. Kids plant there now. And next spring, we're teaching them how to test soil and speak truth, even when it smells like bleach. The irony struck just as the senator's SUV hit a pothole outside my property and splashed a wave of mud across his security escort. This road is a liability, he muttered. I grinned from the porch. You mean like the woman your office endorsed for 3 years running as an example of civic stewardship? He didn't reply, because there, 20 yards behind him, stood a billboard installed by the EPA and the University of Wisconsin. Former contamination site, now a model of rural restoration, in partnership with Granger Farm and Whitmore Accountability Initiative. The irony was compost thick. It had been 14 months since Paula Whitmore was sentenced. 14 months since she screamed about aesthetic standards while being cuffed beside a root cellar she'd once tried to poison. And 14 months since my backyard, once dismissed as a dirt patch with delusions of grandeur, had become a living laboratory. A reborn space. A reckoning made visible. But it didn't begin with blueprints. It began with fire. Not literal fire. That had already been extinguished by the feds and their flamethrower-level regulations. But the kind of fire that burns in your chest when you realize a system didn't just fail you. It tried to bury you under a landscaped lie. It started with the mayor. He'd shown up 2 weeks after sentencing, carrying a shovel and a press photographer. We want to help, he said. I gave him gloves. Not the ceremonial kind. The kind with soil under the fingernails by lunchtime. To his credit, he stayed for 4 hours and planted kale. Backwards. But hey, effort counts. Then came Janine. Dr. Janine Krause, microbiologist, field soil remediation specialist, and the only person I've ever met who could discuss anaerobic nitrogen cycling and still make it sound like a love song. She'd helped lead the contamination team, and she'd stuck around. At first for science, then for coffee, then for weekends, then, eventually, for vows exchanged under the rusted archway of my rebuilt greenhouse, with wildflowers blooming out of decontaminated compost. Together, we turned ruin into resource. The root cellar, once a crime scene, was reimagined. One wall now displays a timeline of the case. Another, a rotating exhibit on soil health. Front and center sits the weed killer bottle, encased in thick glass, under a plaque that reads, "This is what power without conscience looks like." A local 8th grader suggested we add a QR code linking to her class's parody video of Paula's HOA rant set to 1980s synth music. We approved it immediately. Workshops started quietly. At first, just a few neighbors. Then environmental groups. Then students. Now, we run seasonal sessions on soil testing and remediation, organic farming post-contamination, identifying gaslighting in HOA meetings, seriously. We even had a retired judge give a talk titled, "How Not to Get Buried by Bureaucracy, a Soil-Level Guide to Citizen Law." It drew a crowd of 87. And 4 local council members sweating through their collars. Then, out of nowhere, came a letter. Typed. Crisp. Lawyerly. From Charles Whitmore. Mr. Granger, my role in this saga may never be fully absolved, but I have begun dismantling what remains of the Whitmore Trust. In its place, I've created a scholarship for first-generation law students pursuing environmental justice. It's called the Granger Fellowship. Consider it one seed among many. I stared at it for a long time. Then I sent him a copy of our workshop schedule with a sticky note. We saved a chair for you. Compost available upon request. But not everyone took the lesson gracefully. 2 former HOA members tried to form a restoration oversight committee, claiming I was monopolizing the narrative. So I invited them to visit the compost pile and assigned them a shovel each. They left in under an hour. One lost a loafer. On a rainy Tuesday in May, a bus pulled up. Out tumbled a group of high schoolers. Backpacks, hoodies, snacks stuffed into jacket sleeves. Most looked like they'd rather be anywhere else. But we walked the fields, showed them how phytoremediation works, let them test soil with their own hands. I saw one boy, tall, quiet, kneel by the garden bed and touch the beets growing there. You sure these are safe? He asked. I nodded. Tested. Monitored. Grown with more science than a NASA project. He laughed. And that laugh made every legal document, every sleepless night, every whisper of you should have sold and walked away worth it. At the end of the day, I gathered them under the barn awning and pointed to a small sign over the door. It read, "We do not forget the damage. We teach from it." I cleared my throat. Funny thing about beets, I told them. They stained deep. The students stared. But with enough work, even the worst stains can be turned into lessons worth sharing. That night, as the sun set over the now green field, a field once marked red with guilt and chemicals, Janine joined me on the porch. The chickens clucked softly, the solar panels hummed, and the sign by our gate gleamed under the final light of day. This land remembers, and it forgives. In a world where power often disguises itself behind polite committees and manicured lawns, the story of Elliot Granger is more than a satisfying tale of justice. It's a warning and a roadmap. Elliot's battle against Paula Whitmore didn't start with a courtroom or a news headline. It started with a beat, with a trespass, with a quiet voice saying, "This isn't right." And that's where most real battles for justice begin, not in dramatic explosions, but in the small, everyday decisions to stand your ground. Today, many communities face a quieter form of erosion, not of soil, but of truth, of accountability, of common decency. Whether it's homeowners bullied by overreaching HOAs, small farmers silenced by corporations, or citizens dismissed when they raise concerns about environmental damage, the pattern is clear. When unchecked power hides behind procedure, people suffer. Elliot didn't fight back with fists. He fought with documentation, vigilance, and principle. He used technology not to control, but to expose. He didn't just catch a neighbor poisoning his crops. He unearthed an entire history of buried wrongdoing, and with it, the buried stories of a whole community. His story reminds us that land has memory, and so do people. It also reminds us that change doesn't happen because we're loud. It happens because we're right, prepared, and relentless. In an age where truth is often diluted by spin, Elliot's approach, quiet, methodical, legally sound, is a model for resistance in the real world. But perhaps most powerful is what came after the fight. Elliot didn't become bitter. He didn't hoard the victory. He shared it. He turned his farm into a place of learning, healing, and rebuilding. He proved that the best revenge is not destruction, but transformation, taking a space once ruined by greed and turning it into a classroom, a sanctuary, and a second chance. That's the real lesson here. When we stand up to abuse cloaked as authority, when we insist that land and law serve people, not the powerful, we don't just restore balance. We plant seeds that grow into legacy. So whether you live on a farm or in a cul-de-sac, whether your battle is with contaminated soil or contaminated politics, remember Elliot Granger, the man who looked at a root cellar, saw a crime scene, and built a museum instead. Because some stories don't just end. They take root, and they grow into the kind of future we'd all be proud to harvest.